Spider-Man, without a doubt, is an incredibly popular character, and that definitely makes sense when you consider how many different iterations we've seen, not only in live action, but also in animation, only being rivaled by Batman as far as how many iterations they both have had in live action and animation. However, that being said, we already did a battle royale for different versions of the Batman, so I only thought it was fitting to do the same thing for the character of Spider-Man. So that's why today we're talking Spider-Man versus Spider-Man Battle Royale. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Alright, Spider-Man versus Spider-Man, let's get right into it. So first and foremost, let's go over our participants. So we have Spider-Man 1994, Spectacular Spider-Man, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, and Ultimate Spider-Man. Now, I did originally have another Spider-Man in mind for this, as this video idea actually came to me through one of the comments. Thank you very much. I always read the comments, and if anyone else has any more suggestions, please leave them down in the comments. Red X versus Batman Beyond will be next weekend, so stay tuned for that. However, although I like to take a lot of inspiration for this, I didn't want to add the fourth Spider-Man they did include for a couple of reasons. However, the biggest reason was Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man already doesn't have that many feats, so if I were to add another version of Spider-Man that doesn't have a ton of feats, it would have, number one, made this video kind of short, but also number two, made the video very top heavy, as it would have been very easy to just say that these two iterations of Spider-Man are clearly in last place, as they have the least amount of feats because they appear in the least amount of episodes and they do the least. So with all that being said, let's get right into it. Most of you are aware of the rules, but let me just go over them very quickly once again. We are not going to calculate FTL plus speed or country level attacks in these videos. We are going to take the battles they have been in and how they have performed in those battles. We are going to measure their IQ, their spider sense, and their overall feats of strength to compare how each and every different version of Spider-Man would have handled each situation had they been in it themselves. And that way we can determine if these Spider-Men were to meet in battle 10 times, which one would come out on top more times than not. So with all the rules out of the way, let's get right into it. Because exiting first in this Spider-Man Battle Royale is going to be Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Now look, is this one my least favorite on this list? Yes. Is this the one that I dislike the animation and art style for the most? Also, yes. However, there is also a lot that I really like about this series. Everything to do with Norman Osborn, I am absolutely loving, and I can't wait for season 2, so stay tuned for reviews and news on that because I will be covering it on this channel. However, all that aside, this is hands down the most inexperienced Spider-Man on this list, and not only that, we see him go against multiple different foes that the other versions of Spider-Man on this list have gone up against, and he realistically does not perform well. And honestly, the two fights that I am going to be talking about most will be his fight against Daredevil, as this fight I think really showcases his lack of training, but not just from a fighting standpoint, also in a practicality standpoint, how to properly use his powers. And yes, I know this was more towards the beginning of the series, so he does get a little better later on. However, he still has some of the same flaws that he has during this battle. And the major flaw to me in this battle is his lack of usage of his spider sense. He is getting caught off guard so many times by Daredevil, and not only that, his strikes are doing next to nothing to Daredevil, who inherently has no super strength. Daredevil also is able to, once Spider-Man attempts to web him up, Daredevil throws him across the roof. And now I know you may say, well, that's not that crazy of a feat. Captain America did that to Spider-Man. Those are two totally different situations. Captain America is a super soldier. He inherently has super strength. And yes, while Spider-Man is stronger than Captain America, it would stand to reason why someone who is enhanced strength-wise would be able to pull this feat off against Spider-Man, who is drastically stronger than Captain America. However, even though Daredevil has much more training than Spider-Man, him being able to do this to Spider-Man definitely shows how inexperienced this Spider-Man is and how he doesn't even properly know how to use his powers. And this is further shown later on when we see him battle up against the Scorpion. And now they do have multiple fights throughout this series. However, the fight I'm more so referencing is actually the fight in which he stops holding back. However, during this fight, he still has the same drawbacks that he had in the Daredevil fight. And that drawback is his lack of knowledge in his spider sense. We see Spider-Man and Hobie talking, and then all of a sudden a scorpion tail comes up, knocks something over, and they are about to get hit. Spider-Man was unable to react. Spider-Man's spider sense was not fast enough. And also through this fight, we see his spider sense is not fast enough. Now, during the fight and as it proceeds, he is able to dodge the scorpion's tail. However, he is looking straight at the scorpion. He knows where the tail is going to be coming from. So this is a very non-impressive feat in my opinion, especially when you consider all of the crazy feats the other versions of Spider-Man have just from a spider sense perspective. Not to mention, this Spider-Man is going all out in this moment. He quite literally is having this mental conversation with Norman Osborn, remembering when Norman told him that he can't always hold back. So in this moment, he is punching Scorpion with what should be his full force. And not only is he not able to knock his jaw off like he does in the comics, he is not even able to knock him unconscious from 1, 2, 5 punches. He is literally on top of him, punching him over and over again, and still the Scorpion did not get knocked out until he laid down a barrage of punches. So this to me showcases that not only is this the least trained Spider-Man on this list, he is also the weakest, so I don't even need to get into the differences between IQ because that would have been my next thing. This one loses based off of sheer lack of skill and lack of knowledge on how to properly use his powers. So that is why Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is going to be eliminated. However, he will not be alone for long because being eliminated second on this list will be Ultimate Spider-Man. Yes, I know this probably does not come to a surprise to most of you. I know a lot of people aren't a huge fan of this series. I myself actually found a lot of enjoyment in it while still understanding it is a very much so aged down series, and that's what it was meant to be. It was meant for younger children. However, during the time when this was coming out, specifically season 1 and 2, I definitely found a lot of enjoyment and saw how good the storytelling was. Usually, it did get a little campy at times. However, all that being said, this version of Spider-Man has some crazy feats. He battles the Sinister Six on his own multiple times. However, he doesn't defeat them. That's actually probably one of the biggest reasons he gets eliminated before the other two, because he, unlike the other two, does go up against the Sinister Six multiple times. However, he himself never defeats them all by himself. Yes, I know there's that moment in the finale of the series where he does technically go up against all six. However, instead of a 6 versus 1 scenario, it's more like a 3 versus 1 scenario and then 3 versus 1 again. However, the 3 versus 1 that happens later is actually 3 versus 4 because the 3 that he fought previously were just under mind control and are now on Spider-Man's side. So it's a little weird, but still, this version of Spider-Man is able to take a ton of damage. He has a very, very useful spider sense, and he is so practically trained in using it. It is possibly one of the best spider senses we've ever seen utilized, and he's taken down a ton of very strong enemies. However, that being said, a lot of the times he does have the assistance of either S.H.I.E.L.D., his different friends fighting alongside him, or even at times different iterations of the Avengers, or some X-Men characters, specifically Wolverine. I know they have a couple team-ups. So to me, this one being eliminated realistically comes down to one thing and one thing alone, and that is his IQ. You see, there are very few moments in this series where he does show he has a very high IQ. Anytime he does converse with Iron Man or teams up with him, he does show that he has a very high IQ, able to understand a lot of the things Tony says, and able to incorporate different things into different plans to take down villains with Tony, specifically the living laser when he does take over some of Iron Man's armor. Spider-Man is able to come up with some type of strategy based around Tony's technology, and we do know that he was the one to come up with the cure for Venom when Harry did get infected. However, that being said, his smarts are downplayed in this series so much to the point where he really does end up being stupid in a lot of situations. And while I can acknowledge that this is mostly to do with the fact that the target audience was younger and they wanted to have more comedic moments, those comedic moments come at the sacrifice of Spider-Man's intelligence. So inherently that makes him viewed as less intelligent than other iterations, because time and time time again, he does make very stupid blunders that he does not learn from. And if he does learn from them, he does not put that learning into practice. So it is because of all of that, he is our second elimination on this list. So with that being said, we have two remaining versions of Spider-Man. And yes, it is Spectacular Spider-Man and Spider-Man 1994. The two versions that practically everyone thought would be in the final versus battle in this video. But with that being said, we must pick a winner. So being eliminated third on this list, we have Spectacular Spider-Man. Now, I know, this version of Spider-Man has crazy feats. First, let's get into how absolutely smart this version of Spider-Man is. Dr. Connors, Eddie Brock, Gwen Stacy, and Dr. Connors' wife were all trying to come up with a cure for the lizard, and they could not do so. However, Peter Parker is able to do this relatively quickly. You see, he looks at the issue totally different than they look at the issue, and he tries to dumb it down in a very simple way. And he says it's similar to how your phone filters out noise. Instead of looking at this problem the way you guys are looking at it, we need to look at it the exact opposite. We need to look at this as trying to create a cleanser rather than trying to undo what was already done. And although Eddie Brock kind of scoffs at this and says that's not going to work, Dr. Connor's wife quite literally says that is absolutely brilliant. And then they get to synthesizing this antidote and it absolutely works. And he shows this time and time again. His ability to come up with different strategies on the fly, not only to win in physical combat, but also from a scientific perspective. He uses his massive brain to oftentimes cure his enemies, like with what he did with Venom. He acknowledged that he could not defeat Venom. So the first time they did battle against each other, he decided to use his brain and his willpower to overcome this enemy. He tricked the symbiote to get off of Eddie Brock to once again merge with him. However, he already knew how to defeat the symbiote by that point. So once it tried merging with Peter Parker, it didn't work at all, and it realized the emotions were all wrong. So it tried to get off of him and go back onto Eddie Brock. However, before it could do this, Spider-Man was able to web up the symbiote and he was then able to bury it. And although Eddie Brock did eventually find it and got the symbiote once again, Spider-Man was able to use that gene cleanser once again in this series to take down Venom. And not only does he have crazy feats as far as how smart he is, his spider sense is absolutely off the charts. There's a moment where he's just swinging through the city and lands on a sign, and then all of a sudden a knife gets thrown right at him and he is able to dodge that with absolute ease. And then later on in that same moment against Craven once again tries to throw a knife at Spider-Man, and Spider-Man catches it right in front of his face very easily. There's a moment that a spear gets thrown at Spider-Man, and once again he is able to dodge it. And not only dodge it, he is falling down an alleyway as he is trying to dodge this spear that is thrown two different times, and both times that the spear is thrown, he is able to dodge it with relative ease, I might add. And not only that, there are multiple attacks that he is able to dodge from Electro. And now, while it isn't quite confirmed how quick these attacks are, it is actual lightning, so we can assume that these attacks are moving at least relative to the speed of light. So with that being said, considering Spider-Man is able to dodge these attacks multiple times, his speed is very much so up there. Now, is it light speed? No, definitely not. That would only be indicated if one of the lightning bolts was striking directly at him. However, a lot of the times with Electro, it's more of a scenario where his attacks are very widespread versus a straight shot at Spider-Man. So while this is a very impressive feat, it isn't anything that makes Spider-Man light speed or anything like that. However, that doesn't necessarily end how impressive this version of Spider-Man is, as he is seen to take some of the most damage we have ever seen. He has been electrocuted multiple times and continues fighting. He took down the Sinister Six multiple times. Now, one of those times he did have the help of the symbiote, so I can't really count that one too much. However, another instance, he does battle all 6 members of the Sinister Six. Now, he does it in pairs of 2, and one by one, he takes on these teams of 2. However, in all of these fights, he uses his brains to overcome these extremely strong enemies, and he is able to take all of them down without taking too much damage. However, that being said, during this fight, he is knocked off of a literal skyscraper. So that right there puts his durability incredibly high. Not only that, during the battle against Venom, he gets thrown through multiple cars. He gets thrown off of a building. And through all of this, he is still able to get up and keep fighting, showing not only how resilient this version of Spider-Man is, but how absolutely insanely durable he is. But with all that being said, I do still believe he would be eliminated third in this fight, and that leaves the champion exiting last as the winner of this battle, and that is Spider-Man 1994. Now, I know what you may say, this version of Spider-Man can't possibly win. He doesn't actually throw a punch in his whole series, which, if any of you saw my video from Monday going over censorship of Spider-Man 1994, you will know that is false because he does actually throw punches. They're just very limited in who they can be against and how many punches can be thrown. So go check that out if you want a little more info there. However, that being said, this version of Spider-Man goes up against the Insidious Six, also known as the Sinister Six. It's just different in this series. But anyway, he does go up against them multiple times. And the very first time he goes up against them, he is quite literally losing his powers. So we see a literal weakened version of Spider-Man take on the Sinister Six and defeat them. And the way in which he does this is he uses his superior brain power to outsmart every single one of them. Yes, Doc Ock included, showing just how smart this version of Spider-Man is. He is able to routinely outsmart multiple different highly intelligent enemies. And not only that, he too is able to create multiple cures for things. He makes coagulating web fluid at one point to stop Hydra Man, and it does work to a degree. Not only that, when he does face off against the Spot, he is able to use different physics and geometry to help him to defeat and web up this enemy. And we can't forget when he was quite literally responsible for helping to create Morbius, and then he was partially responsible for helping to cure Morbius. Now, I know Dr. Connors did have a lot to do with this. However, that being said, all of this definitely shows that this is without a doubt the smartest iteration of Spider-Man we have ever seen. And yes, I am also including live action. Now, going on to his spider sense, it was somewhat inconsistent for this series, as at times, because it was directed towards younger kids, he was shown to be thrown off guard at times. However, there were other instances in which they 100% forgot that it was supposed to be a show for younger kids, because he was out here dodging things that he objectively should not have been able to dodge. In the moment the Green Goblin gets thrown into that portal, there are multiple lightning bolts, one of which directly fires at Spider-Man. And in this moment, he not only is able to react to this lightning bolt, but he is able to dodge it. And it isn't just one, it's multiple shooting at him. And this is crazy because he was not expecting this. It is not like he was in a battle against Electro, meaning he would have been expecting electricity to come firing at him. No, this is a total surprise feat. However, it was a surprise feat that 100% missed the mark. And while yes, these lightning bolts weren't directly targeting Spider-Man, they were literally about to hit the spot where he currently was standing. So had he not dodged in that moment and reacted in time, he would have been struck by lightning multiple times. At least 3 of those lightning bolts would have absolutely hit him. And still, he was able to dodge every single one of them. Not only that, he takes a ton of damage throughout this series, whether that is in his fights with the Sinister Six, where he's literally battling them with essentially no powers, and still pretty much comes out unscathed, only complaining about how sore his arms are. And not only that, since we're talking about durability, when we talked about Spectacular Spider-Man, we mentioned his incredible durability. And while that's true, there is a major difference between these two characters and their durability. You see, there's a fight in Spectacular Spider-Man where he is battling against the Lizard. However, he underestimates how absolutely durable the Lizard is, and in this moment, he does unfortunately injure his hand, and then we do see he has to wrap up his hand, and through the rest of the episode, his hand is clearly injured. And even at the end of the episode, after everything is done, he still clearly says that his hand is busted up. Now, we have to compare this to something else in Spider-Man 1994. In Spider-Man 1994, although he doesn't throw a lot of punches, one of the 3-piece combos he does decide to throw is against Scorpion's tail. And in this series, Scorpion's tail is made of adamantium. And although Spider-Man, after punching Scorpion's tail 3 times, says that his hands hurt and says something like, "Oh, what are you made of? Adamantium?" he continues the fight. He does not have to wrap up his hands. He does not make mention mention later on in the episode or in the episodes after that his hands are still hurt, showing that his durability quite literally has the ability to punch adamantium full force and not take any actual damage. I say actual damage because yes, he did acknowledge that his hands hurt. However, that's more so similar to how if I were to punch this desk right beside me, my hand would hurt. However, would it lead to it being sprained or anything like that? No, probably not. Similar to how he did acknowledge his hands hurt after punching this tail, he did not have to wrap them up, unlike Spectacular Spider-Man did. Now, another instance of how this iteration of Spider-Man is so far and beyond the winner on this list, he goes up against quite literally so many crazy powerful enemies. One in Doctor Doom, the Red Skull, the strongest iteration we've seen of Electro in animation, as he was compared to being godlike, trying to be the superpower for the Axis powers. That is how Red Skull described it. But all this being said, Spider-Man is still able to fight against this version of Electro. He is able to dodge this version of Electro's attacks, and at times he is able to tank these attacks, meaning he gets hit with some of them and yet still is able to get back up. And not only that, he comes up with a plan to inevitably stop Electro, arguably the strongest version of Electro we've ever seen. So it is because of all of that and all of these crazy villains that he does go up against that I do have this version of Spider-Man coming out on top in this battle. But I'm interested to hear what all of you think. Do you agree with my take on this, or do you have a totally different Spider-Man winning this fight? And if you have any other versus battles that you want me to do, please drop them down in the comments. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.